My name is Dove Patterson, and I am 26 years old. I never imagined that the day my own family tried to publicly humiliate me at my brother's wedding would become the single greatest moment of my life. It was the day I finally stopped being their quiet little librarian and showed them who I really was. But before we get to the moment my father's jaw hit the floor and my mother's face turned the color of chalk, we have to go back to the moment that started it all, a simple, crushing phone call that shattered the last bit of hope I had for their approval. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. And if you've ever felt underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most, hit that like button and subscribe. You're in good company here. The past is a heavy coat you can't ever seem to take off. For me, that coat was woven from a fabric of constant comparison, and its weight settled on my shoulders before I was old enough to even understand the burden. My brother, Liam, was the sun. I was the shadow he cast. It was a dynamic established in the small, everyday moments of childhood that, when stitched together, created a suffocating tapestry of favoritism. I remember my 7th birthday. I had asked for one thing, a specific set of illustrated classic novels I had seen at the town's only bookstore. I'd visited them every week, tracing the gold leaf titles with my finger, dreaming of the worlds inside. Instead, I received a practical, beige sweater my mother found on sale. "It'll keep you warm, Dove," she had said, her attention already drifting to Liam, who was tearing the wrapping paper off a brand new, gleaming red bicycle. Something he'd only mentioned wanting a week earlier. He got the dream. I got the necessity. That was the pattern. Liam's football games were mandatory family events. My father, Robert, would stand on the sidelines, his voice a booming drum of encouragement, his pride a palpable force field around him. My mother, Carol, would have a cooler packed with snacks and drinks for the team. They were the perfect supportive parents for the star quarterback. My academic awards ceremonies were, in contrast, optional. More often than not, they were missed. "Oh, honey, was that tonight?" my mother would say, a vague, distant look in her eyes. "Your father had a late meeting, and Liam's practice ran long. You know how it is." I did know. I knew my achievements were footnotes in the grand, exciting novel of my brother's life. I learned early on not to expect the spotlight. Instead, I found solace in the quiet corners of the school library, in the hushed reverence of the local bookstore. Books didn't play favorites. They offered their wisdom and adventures to anyone willing to open their covers. They became my first, truest allies. While Liam was out cultivating popularity, I was cultivating knowledge. While he was learning to throw a perfect spiral, I was learning to code, huddled over a clunky, second-hand desktop in my room. I taught myself HTML, CSS, and Python from library books and grainy online tutorials. It was a secret world, a place where I could build things from scratch, where logic and effort yielded predictable, satisfying results. It was the antithesis of my family life. But there was one person who saw me. Really saw me. My Grandma June. She was my father's mother, a woman who moved with a quiet dignity and possessed an uncanny ability to see the truth of things. She lived in a small cottage on the edge of town, surrounded by a wild, beautiful garden and stacks upon stacks of books. Her house smelled of old paper, lavender, and baked bread. It was my sanctuary. While my parents saw my bookishness as a quaint, harmless hobby, Grandma June saw it as a strength. It was she who gave me my first coding manual, a thick, intimidating tome I still own. She'd pressed it into my hands one afternoon when I was 14, her warm, wrinkled fingers covering mine. "Cleverness is a quiet power, sweet girl," she had told me, her eyes sparkling with a knowing light. "Don't you ever let them shout it down." That phrase became my mantra. As I grew older, the favoritism didn't fade. It just became more expensive. Liam decided he wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was a noble ambition in my parents' eyes. It sounded impressive at dinner parties. "Our Liam," my father would announce to their friends, "he has vision." His vision, as it turned out, was a series of costly, ill-conceived ventures. First, it was a bespoke sock subscription service. My parents invested $20,000. It folded in 6 months. Then came the artisanal dog food delivery startup. Another $30,000. That one lasted a year, leaving behind a garage full of expired kibble. Each failure was met not with caution, but with renewed, baffling enthusiasm from our parents. "He's learning," my father would rationalize. "You have to fail to succeed, it's the mark of a true innovator." My ambitions were far more modest. I wanted to become a librarian and get a master's degree in library and information science. It was a practical, achievable goal that aligned with everything I loved. The tuition for the state university program was a fraction of what they had poured into Liam's doomed businesses. I presented them with a detailed plan, a budget, and the acceptance letter. My father had looked over my papers, his brow furrowed. "A librarian, Dove? Really?" he'd said, a note of disappointment coloring his tone. "It's a nice, safe job, I suppose, but it's not ambitious. We've invested so much in Liam's future," my mother added gently, as if breaking bad news. "We just don't have the funds to spare right now. You've always been so good at saving. I'm sure you can figure it out." They were right about one thing. I was good at saving. The neglect had taught me to be fiercely independent. From the age of 16, I had been building websites for small local businesses, a side hustle born from my secret coding hobby. The money I earned didn't go to clothes or movies, it went into a savings account, a secret fund for a future I knew I'd have to build myself. That fund, combined with scholarships I fought tooth and nail for and a mountain of student loans, got me through my undergraduate and master's degrees. I worked 2 jobs while studying, shelving books at the university library by day and serving tables by night. My life was a carefully constructed fortress of frugality and hard work. Meanwhile, Liam's life, bankrolled by our parents, was a highlight reel of carefree exploration. I saw it on social media, pictures of him finding himself in Bali, networking in Ibiza, ideating at a ski resort in Aspen. Each post was a small, sharp sting. It wasn't jealousy of the trips or the parties. It was the injustice. The glaring, infuriating unfairness of it all. My hardship was seen as a given, a testament to my sensible nature. His recklessness was seen as an investment, a testament to his bold spirit. This disparity laid the foundation for everything that was to come. It taught me a crucial lesson: their validation was a currency I would never possess. My worth, if it was to exist at all, would have to be something I built myself, in secret, far from their judgmental eyes. The fortress I built became a laboratory. And the quiet power Grandma June spoke of was about to find its voice, not in a shout, but in the silent, undeniable language of success. The final crack in my carefully managed composure didn't happen in a dramatic, explosive confrontation. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, over the phone, with the mundane sound of the library's air conditioner humming in the background. It was a call that would redraw the map of my life. My business, the one I had been building in the shadows for years, was growing at an exponential rate. Quill Codex, my online platform for rare book collectors and a marketplace for independent authors, had started as a passion project. It combined my love for literature with the coding skills I'd honed in secret. Now, it was a real, thriving enterprise with servers to maintain, developers to manage, and a rapidly expanding user base. It was my little online hobby, as my mother condescendingly called it. That hobby was now generating more profit in a month than my parents' combined annual income. But they didn't know that. To them, I was just Dove, the quiet librarian with a sensible but uninspired life. I needed to upgrade my server infrastructure. It was a crucial, time-sensitive investment to keep the platform from crashing under the weight of its own success. The cost was significant, but a drop in the ocean of my business account. But I had a rule: I lived on my librarian's salary. Every penny of profit from Quill Codex was reinvested or saved. It was a discipline I maintained to keep my 2 worlds separate, to keep my feet on the ground. Breaking that rule felt like a failure. So, in a moment of weakness, a foolish, residual flicker of hope that things might be different this time, I decided to ask them for a loan. Not for the full amount. Just $2,000. A test. A stupid, hopeful test. I called my mother during my lunch break. "Hi, Mom," I began, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "How are you?" "Oh, Dove, I'm so glad you called," she chirped, her voice strained with a familiar, manufactured brightness. "We were just talking about you." My heart gave a stupid little leap. We've had to help Liam out again, she continued, and the leap turned into a plummet. His latest venture, well, it didn't quite pan out. Some issues with investors. Your father had to pay off a $50,000 debt to keep things from getting messy. $50,000. The number hung in the air between us, obscene and absurd. It was more than my entire student loan burden. He has such brilliant ideas, she sighed, but the market is just so volatile. I took a deep breath, the air in my lungs turning to ice. Right. Well, actually, the reason I'm calling is, I was hoping I could possibly get a small loan, just $2,000. It's for my website, to upgrade some equipment. Silence. Then, a sound that was far worse than a refusal. Laughter. My mother was laughing. It wasn't a mean laugh, not exactly. It was worse. It was a patronizing, dismissive chuckle, the kind you give a child who has just said something impossibly naive. Oh, honey, she said, catching her breath. Dove, darling, when are you going to get a real job with a pension? Like a teacher, or... Oh wait, you're a librarian. Well, it's stable, I suppose. We just can't throw good money after bad with these little internet fads. That was it. The final straw. The words landed like stones, each one a separate, distinct blow. Good money after bad. Little internet fates. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. It's not a fad, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Of course not, dear, she said placatingly. It's a lovely hobby, but $2,000 is a lot of money. I felt a surge of cold, white-hot fury. You just gave Liam $50,000 for a failure, I said, my voice shaking. I'm asking for $2,000 for a success. My father must have picked up the extension because his voice, stern and impatient, cut in. That's different, Dove, and you know it. We've already invested everything in your brother's future. He's the one with real ambition. He's trying to build something. We can't be expected to fund your hobbies. I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I placed it gently back in its cradle, my hand trembling so violently I could barely control it. I walked to the staff bathroom, locked the door, and slid down the cool tile wall until I was sitting on the floor. And then I broke. It wasn't loud, theatrical sobbing. It was a silent, convulsive weeping that racked my entire body. Tears streamed down my face, hot and bitter. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the crushing, soul-destroying weight of their blindness. The injustice of it was a physical pain, a vice grip around my chest. For years, I had held on to a tiny, ember-like hope that one day they would see me. That one day, my hard work, my discipline, my quiet achievements would finally register. That phone call had been my last attempt to fan that ember into a flame. Instead, they had casually, effortlessly extinguished it forever. I sat on that cold floor for a long time, the hum of the building, a distant drone. When the tears finally subsided, they were replaced by something else. Something cold and hard and clear. Resolve. I stood up and looked at my reflection in the cheap, warped mirror. My face was blotchy, my eyes were red and swollen. But for the first time, I saw a stranger looking back at me. A woman who was done. Done hoping. Done asking. Done explaining. Done trying to be seen by people who refused to open their eyes. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop, and transferred the full amount needed for the server upgrade from my business account to my personal one. Then, I opened a new browser tab and looked at the real-time analytics for Quill Codex. Users online, 50, 0. Revenue in the last 24 hours, 30, 0. I looked at the numbers, the undeniable empirical proof of what I had built. A quiet power. Grandma June was right. And I was done being quiet. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't argue. I would succeed. I would build an empire so vast and a life so brilliant that my success would become a roar they could not ignore. That night, sitting in my small, sparse apartment, surrounded by the glow of my monitors, I made a conscious, deliberate decision. I severed the invisible cord that had tied my self-worth to their approval. The pain was still there, a raw, gaping wound. But now it was fuel. The point of no return had been crossed. A new life began that night, one built on a foundation of my own making. It was a life of dualities, a carefully balanced act of two vastly different identities. By day, I was Dove Patterson, the dependable librarian at the Oak Haven Public Library. I wore cardigans and sensible shoes. I spoke in hushed tones. I helped patrons find books on gardening and troubleshoot the public computers. I was pleasant, unassuming, and utterly invisible. My colleagues were kind. They saw me as a sweet, slightly reclusive young woman who was good at her job and loved books. They had no idea. The moment I walked through the door of my small one-bedroom apartment at 5 o'clock, the transformation began. The cardigan came off, replaced by the comfortable, worn-out hoodie that served as my CEO uniform. The quiet librarian receded, and the founder of Quill, Codex, emerged. My nights, and often my early mornings, were a whirlwind of activity. I was no longer just the founder, I was the entire C-suite. I was the chief executive officer, strategizing growth and mapping out the future of the company. I was the chief technology officer, overseeing a remote team of freelance developers, troubleshooting bugs, and planning the next platform update. I was the chief financial officer, managing payroll, analyzing profit and loss statements, and making investment decisions that involved staggering sums of money. The path was arduous. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't always afford. There were nights I'd be on a video call with a developer in Bangalore at 2 a.m., then up at 6 a.m. to prepare for a day of reshelving books. My social life was non-existent. While people my age were going out for drinks or on dates, I was negotiating contracts with international publishing houses or mitigating a denial-of-service attack on my servers. I lived in a state of perpetual high-functioning exhaustion. The loneliness of it was the hardest part. I was sitting on a secret that was growing bigger and more explosive by the day. I had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, a feat of intellect and sheer willpower. And I couldn't tell a soul. To celebrate a major milestone like securing a partnership that doubled our user base overnight meant ordering a pizza and eating it alone at my desk, my only companion, the glowing screen of my laptop. The pride was there, a quiet, fierce warmth in my chest, but it was a solitary pride. This lonely struggle was thrown into sharp, painful relief by the life my brother was so publicly living. Liam's social media was a constant, curated feed of effortless privilege. While I was debugging code with tired, gritty eyes, he was posting a selfie from the deck of a yacht, #entrepreneurlife. While I was subsisting on coffee and instant noodles to get through a project launch, he was at a 5-star restaurant, complaining that the champagne wasn't cold enough. Our parents were his biggest cheerleaders. Every post of his was flooded with their comments. "That's our boy, reaching for the stars," my father would write. "So proud of you, sweetie, you work so hard," my mother would add. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He wasn't working hard. He was spending their money. I was the one working, building a real, tangible, profitable business, and my existence was a quiet, stable footnote in their family narrative. But slowly, things began to change. My self-imposed isolation started to crack, not because I sought it, but because life brought people into my orbit who saw me for who I was, without ever knowing the full story. My new support system, my chosen family, began to form. The first to enter was Sarah. She was a fellow librarian, a few years older than me, with a wickedly sharp sense of humor and a no-nonsense attitude that I found incredibly refreshing. She didn't pry into my private life, but she saw the exhaustion I tried so hard to hide. "Dove," she said one day, placing a steaming mug of tea on my desk, "you look like you're wrestling with a poltergeist every night and losing. Whatever it is, you don't have to do it alone." She didn't ask for details. She just offered her presence. We started having lunch together, then weekly dinners at a cheap local diner. She made me laugh. She reminded me that there was a world outside of my apartment and the library. She valued me for my kindness and my quiet wit, not for any measure of ambition or success. She was the first real friend I'd had in years. Then came Marcus. I met him through an online forum for tech entrepreneurs. He was a successful software developer from Chicago who had sold his first company in his late 20s. He used the handle CodeSlinger, and I was Librarian X. We started exchanging messages about business strategy and server architecture. His advice was brilliant, incisive, and generous. He was the first person who could truly understand the professional challenges I was facing. Our online conversations slowly bled into our personal lives. We talked about books, music, our dreams, our frustrations. After months of daily communication, we finally had a video call. Seeing him for the first time was nerve-wracking, but his smile was warm and genuine, and his eyes held the same intelligence and kindness I'd come to admire in his messages. Eventually, I told him everything. My name, my job, my family, and the secret of Quill, Codex. I laid it all out, terrified that he would see me as a fraud, or worse, pity me. He just listened, his expression unreadable. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Dove," he finally said, his voice soft, "that's not a story about injustice. That's an origin story. You're not a victim, you're a superhero, living a double life." His validation was like water in a desert. It wasn't the blind praise of my parents for Liam, it was respect, earned and freely given by a peer who understood the work it had taken. Marcus became more than a mentor. He became my partner, my co-conspirator, my biggest champion. He flew out to Oakhaven to visit, and our connection was as real offline as it was online. With Sarah's friendship and Marcus's love, the loneliness began to recede. The weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. And just as my personal life started to blossom, so did my business. The first fruits of my labor began to ripen into undeniable, tangible success. Quill, Codex hit its first $1 million revenue month. Then 2. Then 5. I hired a full-time remote staff, a small, brilliant team scattered across the globe. We were a silent, digital force, changing the landscape of the literary world from our home offices and laptops. I celebrated these victories quietly, but with a growing sense of fierce pride. I celebrated with Marcus, who would pop a bottle of champagne in Chicago while I did the same in Oakhaven over video call. I celebrated with Sarah by treating us to a fancy dinner where she just thought I was splurging from my savings. The struggles had given me an edge. The years of forced frugality had made me a ruthless, efficient CEO. The years of being underestimated had made me meticulous and driven. Every slight, every dismissal from my family had been a stone, and I had used each one to build the foundation of my empire. The quiet power was becoming a force of nature, and it was only a matter of time before the storm made landfall. The turning point arrived not with a bang, but with a nomination. Quill, Codex was nominated for the Digital Innovation in Literature Award, one of the most prestigious honors in the tech and publishing industries. It was the equivalent of an Oscar for companies like mine. To be nominated was a monumental achievement in itself. When I got the email, I had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. My little hobby, my internet fad, was being recognized on a national stage. The awards ceremony was in New York City. The founder was expected to attend. This presented a new, terrifying problem. The founder of Quill, Codex, was officially anonymous, known only by the pseudonym DP that I'd used since the beginning. The company had a public relations team now, and they had masterfully cultivated a mystique around my identity. But this was different. Winning would mean a level of exposure I couldn't control. Marcus was ecstatic. "You have to go, Dove. This is it. This is your moment." "I can't," I argued, pacing my small living room. "What if I win? I'd have to go on stage. There would be articles, pictures, my parents would see." "So what if they see?" he countered gently. "Isn't that the point? To stop hiding?" He was right. But the fear was a cold knot in my stomach. I had spent so long in the shadows that the light felt dangerous. In the end, we compromised. I agreed to attend the ceremony, but I would remain anonymous unless I won. We won. When they announced Quill, Codex as the winner, the world seemed to slow down. I walked to the stage in a daze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I accepted the heavy, gleaming award and gave a short, pre-written speech, my voice steadier than I felt. The aftermath was a controlled explosion. My PR team went into overdrive. We agreed to a single exclusive feature with a major business magazine. I insisted on certain conditions. The article would focus on the company's journey, my identity would be revealed only at the very end, and they would use a professionally taken, artfully shadowed photograph. The story was a sensation. The librarian who built a literary empire was the headline. It went viral. But in the small town of Oakhaven, the news didn't seem to travel. My life remained unchanged. My parents, who didn't read business magazines, remained blissfully, infuriatingly, oblivious. And then, just as the dust from the award was settling, a different kind of explosion happened, one much closer to home. Liam's latest and most ambitious venture, an NFT marketplace for digital images of artisanal toast, a concept so absurd, it was almost performance art, imploded in spectacular fashion. It wasn't just a failure, it was a catastrophe. He had taken money from shady investors, made promises he couldn't keep, and was now facing not just colossal debt, but the threat of serious legal action. He called me one night, his voice frantic and broken. It was the first time I had ever heard my brother sound anything less than supremely confident. "Dove, I'm in trouble," he stammered. "Real trouble. Dad can't fix this one." I listened as he poured out the whole sordid story. It was a mess of mismanagement, naivety, and outright stupidity. He had been played by his partners and was now the scapegoat. "They're talking about fraud, Dove. Lawsuits. I could lose everything." He was crying now, ugly, gulping sobs. "I don't know what to do." A year ago, I might have felt a grim satisfaction. Schadenfreude. But hearing the genuine terror in his voice, I just felt a weary sadness. He was my brother. And he was drowning. "I'll help you," I said, the words surprising even myself. "You?" he asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "What can you do? You're a librarian." The old sting was there, but it was faint now, a distant echo. "I know more than you think, Liam," I said calmly. "Send me everything, every contract, every email, every financial statement, don't leave anything out." For the next 2 weeks, I became a forensic accountant and legal strategist by night. I combed through the digital wreckage of his company. I found clauses in contracts he'd never read, loopholes in agreements he'd blindly signed. I put him in touch with a top-tier corporate lawyer from my own network, a man whose services cost more per hour than Liam had ever earned in a year. I paid the retainer from my personal account. I created a step-by-step plan to mitigate the damage, negotiate with the investors, and dismantle the company with the least possible fallout. We worked side by side at my kitchen table night after night. For the first time, Liam saw me work. He saw the speed with which I could read a balance sheet, the precision of my logic, the authority with which I spoke to lawyers and accountants. He watched me, his expression shifting from desperation to confusion to, finally, a dawning, stunned respect. One night, after a grueling 4-hour call with the legal team, he just stared at me across the table, which was littered with financial documents. How do you know all this, Dove?" he asked, his voice quiet with awe. This is genius-level stuff. Where did you learn to do this?" I looked at him, the golden child, the one with real ambition, now utterly humbled. "I had to," I said simply. "No one was going to do it for me." The words landed in the quiet room with more force than a shout. He flinched, as if I'd struck him. He finally understood. He saw the years of disparity, of neglect, of unfairness, not from my perspective, but from the stark reality of what I had been forced to become in response. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Dove, I am so sorry for everything." It was the beginning of his transformation. Our parents, however, remained unchanged. My mother called me during this period, her voice laced with anxiety. "Your brother is having such a hard time," she said, her tone accusatory. "He's so stressed, the least you could do is be more supportive." I was currently saving him from financial and legal ruin, a fact he had apparently not shared with them. "Maybe you could loan him a few $100s from your little library salary," she suggested. "Every little bit helps." I closed my eyes, a wave of cosmic, staggering irony washing over me. "I'm helping him in my own way, Mom," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Well, try to be there for him," she huffed, completely missing the point. "He's the one with the real-world pressures." The stage was being set for the final act. Liam, with the legal mess contained and a payment plan in place, a plan I had personally funded and structured, began to put his life back together. His fiancée, a wonderful woman named Chloe from a wealthy and well-respected family, had stuck by him. They decided to move forward with their wedding. It was to be a massive affair, a chance for our parents to project an image of success and stability, to paper over the cracks of Liam's recent failure. The invitation arrived, a thick, cream-colored card with gold-embossed lettering. A few days later, Liam called me. "Dove," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "I want you to be a groomswoman." I was stunned. "Liam, you don't have to do that." "Yes, I do," he insisted. "I want you standing up there with me. I need you there." I knew it was his way of making a statement, a public acknowledgement of his newfound respect. I also knew it would infuriate our parents. They wanted me to be a quiet guest, a background character, not part of the main cast. But they couldn't refuse their son's request. The date was set. The venue was booked. The players were all in place. I had no idea that my brother's wedding would become the stage for my own, unintentional, public vindication. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect autumn afternoon. The venue was a sprawling, opulent country club, the kind of place my parents adored. It was all gleaming chandeliers, manicured lawns, and the hushed, expensive murmur of the local elite. I stood beside Liam at the altar, wearing a tasteful bridesmaid gown, feeling like an actor in a play I hadn't rehearsed. Liam was a nervous wreck, but every time he caught my eye, he gave me a small, grateful smile. He knew. He was my ally now, a fact that was a quiet comfort. My parents, however, were a different story. They moved through the crowd with a brittle, forced joviality. When they looked at me, their smiles were tight, their eyes cold. My presence in the wedding party was a bitter pill they had been forced to swallow. The ceremony was beautiful. Chloe was radiant, and Liam looked at her with a love that was deep and genuine. I felt a real, uncomplicated happiness for them. But as we moved to the reception, the familiar weight of my family's disapproval began to settle back onto my shoulders. The reception hall was a sea of white linens and extravagant floral arrangements. I found my seat, not at the head table with the rest of the wedding party, but at a table in the back, near the kitchens, tucked away with some distant cousins and my grandmother. Grandma June squeezed my hand under the table. "Best seat in the house," she whispered with a wink, "closest to the cake and farthest from the nonsense." I smiled, but the slight stung. It was a deliberate, petty gesture, a reminder of my place. Then came the toasts. Chloe's father gave a warm, lovely speech. The best man told a few funny stories. And then, my father, Dove Patterson, stood up, tapping his glass for attention. He beamed, his chest puffed out with pride. He looked every bit the proud patriarch. "I want to talk about my son, Liam," he began, his voice booming through the hall. "A man of vision, of courage. A man who isn't afraid to take risks, to fall down and get back up again. He embodies the spirit of ambition that this family and this country was built on. We are so incredibly proud of the man he has become." The room applauded politely. Liam shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. My father scanned the room, his eyes eventually landing on me, seated in the back. He gave a small, indulgent smile. "And," he continued as an afterthought, "I want to toast my daughter, Dove." A wave of silence fell over the room as all eyes turned to me. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me, hot and probing. "We're so proud," he said, drawing the word out as if searching for the right sentiment, "that she has her stable job at the library. It's good to have a fallback." He paused for effect. "A quiet life is a fine ambition for some." He winked at one of his business associates at a nearby table, a shared, knowing gesture of condescension. A ripple of polite, uncomfortable chuckles went through the room. It was it. The ultimate public dismissal. He hadn't just insulted me. He had belittled my entire existence in a room full of his peers, turning my life into a punchline. In that moment, something inside me didn't break. It solidified. All the pain, the anger, the years of frustration, coalesced into a single point of absolute, tranquil clarity. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I held my father's gaze from across the room and I smiled. A small, serene, enigmatic smile. Liam looked horrified. He started to stand up, ready to grab the microphone to defend me. I gave him the slightest shake of my head. "Not your battle," my eyes said, "mine." He hesitated, then slowly sat back down, his face a mixture of anger and trust. My father, satisfied with his performance, raised his glass. To Liam and Chloe. As the toast concluded, the wedding planner, a chic, efficient woman with a headset, strode to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice crisp and professional, "we have one more surprise for the happy couple." A massive screen, which had been dormant behind the band, flickered to life. "This gift is sponsored by a true innovator in the literary world," the planner continued, reading from a card, "a company that has revolutionized the way we connect with books, and a testament to the power of a singular vision." The logo for Quill, Codex, filled the screen. A soft, collective gasp went through the few people in the room who recognized it. My father looked confused, annoyed that something was upstaging his toast. The founder of this company wanted to give Liam and Chloe a wedding gift they would never forget, the planner said with a flourish. A 10-year, all-expenses paid round-the-world honeymoon. The room erupted in stunned murmurs. 10 years. It was an absurd, fantastical, impossibly generous gift. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stared at the screen, his jaw slack. But the presentation wasn't over. The founder, who for years has remained anonymous, wanted to share a little of their story with you tonight, the planner said. The screen changed. It was the video feature from the business magazine. A sleek, professionally produced mini-documentary began to play. It told the story of Quill Codex, of its humble beginnings and meteoric rise. It spoke of the mysterious founder, DP, a brilliant, tenacious entrepreneur who built a multi-million-dollar empire from nothing. I could see my parents leaning forward, captivated, like everyone else. They were impressed by this story of ambition and success, completely unaware that they were its unwitting antagonists. The video reached its climax. And now, the narrator's deep voice intoned, "The world can finally meet the mind behind Quill, Codex." The video showed a figure cloaked in shadow, sitting in a library. The figure leaned forward into the light. It was me. My face, professionally lit and serious, filled the 20-foot screen. The camera in the reception hall panned, finding me at my table in the back. The spotlight hit me. The serene, private smile was still on my face. For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute, stunned silence. The only sound was the faint clinking of a fork being dropped. Then, a man at a table near the front stood up. It was the editor-in-chief of the business magazine, a guest of Chloe's family. He began to applaud, slow and deliberate at first, then enthusiastically. "To DP," he shouted, "one of the most brilliant entrepreneurs I've ever had the pleasure of profiling." That broke the spell. The room exploded. It wasn't polite applause. It was a roar of shock, of excitement, of dawning comprehension. I looked at the head table. My parents were frozen. My father's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock, his mouth hanging open. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. The color had drained from her face, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen of horror and disbelief. They weren't looking at a success story. They were looking at a ghost of their own making, the ghost of the daughter they had never seen, now materialized in front of the entire world they cared so much about. In that moment of chaos and revelation, Liam stood up. He walked away from the head table, away from our parents, and strode directly to my table. He took my hand and pulled me gently to my feet. He led me to the center of the dance floor, into the spotlight, and took the microphone from the stunned planner. "To my sister," he said, his voice cracking with emotion but ringing with conviction, "the real success story of this family, the one with the real vision. The one who saved me when I was too proud and too stupid to save myself, the one we never, ever deserved." He raised my hand in the air as if I were a victorious prize fighter. From across the room, Grandma June rose slowly from her chair. She walked over to me, her eyes shining with tears of pride, and placed her hand on my shoulder. Marcus and Sarah, whom I had invited as my personal guests, were already by my side, beaming. My chosen family. We stood together in the warm, bright light, a small island of loyalty in a sea of stunned faces. And at the head table, under the opulent chandelier, my parents sat completely, utterly alone, isolated in the sudden, harsh glare of their own profound and public ignorance. The music never restarted. The party, for all intents and purposes, was over. The rest of the evening passed in a surreal blur. People swarmed me, their faces alight with curiosity and newfound respect. Business cards were pressed into my hand. Congratulations were offered, laced with the frantic energy of people realizing they had been in the presence of an anonymous celebrity. I handled it all with a calm I didn't know I possessed. Marcus acted as a gentle bodyguard, steering me through the throng, while Sarah kept a protective hand on my back. Liam and his new wife, Chloe, never left my side. Chloe, far from being upset that her wedding had been hijacked, was electric with excitement. She looped her arm through mine. "You are the most incredible person I have ever met," she whispered. "My family is going to lose their minds. They thought we were the impressive ones." I never spoke to my parents that night. I saw them from a distance, surrounded by a few friends who were speaking to them in low, urgent tones. They looked small, lost, and utterly shell-shocked. Their carefully constructed world, built on appearances and the reflected glory of their son, had been demolished in the space of a 5-minute video. They had tried to push me into the shadows and, in doing so, had only made my emergence into the light more blinding. Leaving the reception was a statement in itself. Liam, Chloe, Grandma June, Marcus, Sarah, and I all left together, a unified front. We piled into a limousine Liam had on standby, leaving my parents behind in the wreckage of their own making. The new reality settled in quickly. The story of the wedding revelation became a local legend, then a national news item. The librarian CEO's grand reveal went even more viral than the original article. There was no more hiding. I resigned from the library the following Monday. My sweet, unsuspecting boss was flabbergasted but thrilled for me. I stepped fully into my role as the public face of Quill Codex. My life transformed. I moved to a larger apartment in a nearby city, one with a dedicated office that wasn't also my bedroom. Marcus moved from Chicago to be with me, our long-distance relationship finally closing its gap. My days were no longer split between two worlds. They were filled with board meetings, strategic planning, public speaking engagements, and the thrilling, challenging work of running a company I loved. I was surrounded by my chosen family. Liam became my fiercest advocate. Humbled and transformed, he started working for one of Quill Codex's charitable arms, a literacy foundation I'd established. He found a purpose that wasn't tied to ego or profit but to genuine service. Our relationship, once strained and distant, became one of deep, mutual respect and affection. Grandma June was, as always, my quiet anchor, endlessly proud but completely unsurprised. "I always knew the story you were writing, sweet girl," she told me. "I was just waiting for the world to read it." My parents, on the other hand, began a clumsy, painful journey toward remorse. The calls and texts started a few days after the wedding. They were awkward, fumbling attempts to bridge a chasm they had spent a lifetime digging. "We didn't understand," my mother wrote in a long, rambling text. "We are so proud of you," my father left in a stiff, uncomfortable voicemail. Their pride was a bitter pill to swallow. It wasn't pride in my character, my resilience, or my hard work. It was pride in my success, in the money and status I had achieved. It was the very thing they had always valued, and now that I possessed it, they wanted to claim it as their own. I ignored them for weeks. I needed the space. I needed to live in my new reality, free from the pull of their dysfunction. Finally, I agreed to meet them. We met on neutral ground at a quiet coffee shop halfway between my new home and Oakhaven. They looked older, smaller than I remembered. They tried to start with praise, with gushing admiration for my accomplishments. I held up a hand, stopping them. "I'm not here to talk about my company," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm here to talk about us." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I calmly, methodically laid out the years of hurt. I spoke of the forgotten awards ceremonies, the birthday disappointments, the constant casual dismissals. I talked about the phone call, the one where they had laughed at my request for $2,000 after giving Liam $50,000. I presented the facts of our history as clearly as I would present a quarterly report to my board. When I finished, they were both silent, tears streaming down my mother's face. My father, for the first time in his life, looked truly ashamed. "We were wrong," he said, his voice thick. "There's no excuse, we were just blind." "I know," I said, "but understanding why it happened doesn't erase the fact that it did." That was the day the power dynamic shifted, permanently. I was no longer the child seeking their approval. I was the adult setting the terms for any future relationship. "I am willing to try," I told them, "but it will be on my terms. It will mean family therapy. It will mean you doing the work to understand what you did. It will be a long, long road. And you have to earn back my trust. It will not be freely given." It was the beginning of a new, cautious chapter. The forgiveness is a work in progress, a slow, deliberate process of rebuilding. Our relationship will never be what it once was, and for that, I am grateful. It will be something new, something more honest, built on the hard ground of truth instead of the shifting sands of favoritism. As I stand here today, in my office overlooking a city skyline, I realize the most profound lesson my journey has taught me. My entire life, I thought what I wanted was my family's recognition. But I was wrong. What I truly needed was my own. The greatest victory wasn't the moment of public vindication at the wedding. It was the quiet moment, months earlier, on the cold floor of the library bathroom, when I decided that my worth was not up for debate. It was internal. Absolute. Mine. The greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so full of love, purpose, and joy that the opinions of those who hurt you become irrelevant, whispers in a distant wind. My family's approval is no longer the sun my world orbits around. I am my own sun now. So I have a final question for you. Have you ever had a moment where you decided to stop waiting for someone else's approval and give it to yourself? Share your story in the comments below. I truly believe our stories are the most powerful things we own. And please, don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you and subscribe for more stories. Remember, the most important validation you will ever receive is the validation that comes from within.